In the Second World War, there were really epic battles, but one of them catches the attention of Hispanics a lot. In this one, several Spanish regiments serving the Axis faced Soviet shock troops with a disadvantage of 10-1. 43,000 men supported by tanks and artillery confronted our protagonists of today, who were only 4,900 men. And in spite of everything, they ended up achieving victory, even without having armored vehicles or many pieces of artillery. Who were these men, and how did they defeat a gigantic Soviet army despite having an overwhelming disadvantage? In this video, we will delve into this epic battle, so get comfortable. My name is Kevin Aguilar, and this is Guns Club. To talk about this battle, we have to go quite a bit back in time, particularly to February 10th, 1943. Stalingrad had just fallen into Soviet hands, and buoyed by his recent victory, General Georgy Zhukov wanted to deliver another hard blow to the Germans, this time in the north. Prior to February 10th, the Germans were looking to encircle Leningrad in order to take the city and establish land communication with the Finns. In this way, they could fight together on a single front. The Soviets, in order to prevent the fall of Leningrad, would initiate Operation Polar Star, which would directly seek to end the Axis resistance in the south of Leningrad and push them as far away from Finland as possible. For this, a joint attack would be made from various flanks surrounding anyone who resisted to retreat. For the battle, the Soviets would have at their disposal 47,000 men with 100 T-34 and KV-1 tanks, and supported from the rear with 1,000 pieces of artillery. There was no possibility of victory for the Axis. Zhukov had received reports that the siege to the south of Leningrad was protected by the Blue Division, a group of Spanish volunteers consisting of only 4,900 men. The Soviet High Command had already crushed these support armies, allied to the Axis in Stalingrad, Romanians, Bulgarians, and Italians multiple times, all armed with obsolete weaponry, often dating from World War I, and even many of the soldiers didn't even know what they were doing in the Soviet Union. So when they faced the Soviets, the little fighting spirit they had and the low morale led them into chaos. Zhukov thought that the Blue Division was nothing more than another one of these provisional armies, equipped with mediocre weaponry and forcibly brought in by the Axis. So for him, it was an unparalleled opportunity to deliver a hard blow to the Axis. However, he could not have been more wrong. The Blue Division was a group of volunteers. They enlisted voluntarily to fight, and many of them had fought in the Spanish Civil War. So not only did they have a lot of combat experience, but they were fervent anti-communists and were thrilled to fight against them. Unlike the Romanians, Italians, and Bulgarians, their weaponry was not supplied by their native country. This time, Germany provided them with modern, top-quality weaponry, which is why Zhukov completely underestimated the Blue Division, which were even more capable troops than the German ones, often having much more combat experience. The main battlefield would be the city of Krasnodar, the only city that connected by railroads and roads to Leningrad. So if they captured Krasnodar, this would be a direct link for carrying supplies from Moscow to Leningrad, so taking Krasnodar primarily would be key. Furthermore, by taking Krasnodar, they could pocket the 4th SS Division, which was pressing from the northwest and, according to them, were more competent troops. For this, the 45 and 63 Guards Divisions and the 122 Armored Brigades would advance from the northwest to the city, heading north of the city, while the 43 Rifle Division would do the same on the other side of the train tracks. And finally, the 72 Division would advance downstream to press the Blue Division and surround them on their flank. The Blue Division, made up of the 269, 263, and 262 Regiment, deployed several battalions from east to west. All their forces were awaiting the inevitable Soviet offensive. In the days leading up to February 10th, they dug trenches and defensive positions to defend themselves more effectively, even held a mass so that everyone could go to heaven if they fell in combat. In the early morning of February 10th, the Spaniards heard from far away from the city. The engines of 100 tanks had to be kept running, as otherwise their engines would freeze. Excavators could also be heard from afar as they were setting up artillery positions. The noise from the 40,000 Soviet men was truly demoralizing. In a few hours, at 6 a.m., the Battle of Krasnivor would start. The few pieces of Spanish artillery would preemptively open fire on the Soviet troops. The Soviets didn't even flinch, not a single shot was heard, until exactly 6:30, when all the Soviet artillery, and when I say all, I mean all, the 1,000 howitzers, rockets, and heavy mortars rained down 36,000 projectiles on the Spanish defenses. Trenches, bunkers, and other defenses lie in total ruin. After the artillery rain, bombs would rain from 30 bombers escorted by 20 houses, wreaking havoc on Spanish artillery. Less than half of the Spanish troops would fall victim to the first Soviet attack. The first line of defense had completely disappeared. Then the Spanish defenses focused on where the town began. After the mega artillery barrage, the north of the town had turned into a huge muddy swamp. The snow melted by the detonations caused everything to fill with water and therefore mud, which made the advance of heavy goods difficult. Despite this, the Soviets decided to move on. At this point, the Soviets were extremely confident. They were supposedly outnumbering the Spaniards 10-1, and after such bombardment, there shouldn't be many of them left. The Soviets, on crossing the first destroyed Spanish defense line, were reporting initial casualties of up to 80%, reports that were really inflated. At 9 a.m., the Soviets arrive at the village and are surprised by the Spanish restraining fire. The Soviets ran to the village firing. However, the Spanish MG-34 and 42 machine guns were able to effectively suppress the Soviets for hours. Throughout the morning, wave after wave of Soviets arrived at the village, pushing the Spaniards back only at some points in the city. Many epic events occurred on the morning of that February 10th. For example, as in La Cresta, a Spanish bunker that had survived the artillery and where the 8th Company of 262 Infantry Regiment, commanded by Captain Arosarina, resided. 70 men managed to defend the area, causing several hundred casualties and destroying 3 tanks, only obtaining 18 casualties. Or also like what the volunteer Antonio Pontenido, 20 years old, managed to defeat a tank by running towards it with an anti-tank mine. Being awarded the Laureate Cross of San Fernando. At noon, thousands of soldiers, more Soviets than Spaniards, lay inert in no man's land and in the first houses of the village. The Spaniards were very well containing the attack. However, by 1 in the afternoon, the overwhelming Soviet advantage was surrounding the village from the sides, pushing the Spaniards into the village. All afternoon on February 10th, the huge battle inside the city of Krasnivor was really tough. Soviet troops were coming from all directions, and the Spaniards were fighting street by street, just like the Germans in Stalingrad. However, by the late hours of the afternoon, they were ordered to withdraw to establish a fortified defense line south of the city and northeast of the river. The battles in the city and northeast of Rykolov's headquarters continued into the night, where the German reserve was replacing the Blue Division, little by little to give them some rest. At night, German-Estonian regiments' reinforcements and the Flemish Legion arrived as the Luftwaffe attacked the front with stucco. Finally, the Soviets managed to defeat the Spanish divisions northeast of Krasnivor on the other side of the tracks, using the 50 armored vehicles they had left for the offensive. They couldn't flank the Spaniards because they didn't have enough strength. Furthermore, the Stuccos threatened them from all sides, so they continued south and ended up running into the 500. 2 heavy panzer battalions, along with the only 3 Tigers from the North Front, and dozens of Panzer IV and Stucks wiped out the 50. Soviet armored vehicles with notable ease. Soviet pressure continued for 2 more days in the early morning of February 11th, but nothing more could be done. Operation Polar Star had been a resounding failure. The men of the Blue Division lost Krasnivor, but had created a stable front, having, as we mentioned before, a 10-1 disadvantage. That's really impressive. The Soviets lost 11,000 men, and all 100 tanks from the operation had been destroyed. The data from the Blue Division was more accurate, showing us that only 1,127 Spaniards were lost, and a further 1,037 were injured, 300 more captured, and 91 disappeared in action. leaving a toll of only 2,553 casualties. Being a total Axis victory and allowing them to continue the siege of Leningrad for one more year until the total withdrawal at the beginning of 1944. Without a doubt, this is one of the most interesting battles of the entire conflict. If you are interested in this story, you probably want to know the story of the German soldier who served both Germany and the Israeli Mossad. Click on the video you have in the middle of the screen. Thanks for watching. See you next time. Goodbye.